Hello, everyone. My name is Mary Catherine Ricker. I'm Executive Director of the Albert Shanker Institute, and I am grateful for all of you joining us today for this webinar. To get started tonight, we would like to begin with this really important message from Randi Weingarten.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this webinar. It's part of the Albert Shanker Institute's Defending Democracy series. And I'm Randi Weingarten, President of the AFT and President of the Board of Directors of the Shanker Institute. And tonight we're proud to present Defending Democracy, the role of South Korean labor unions. I'm proud the Shanker Institute is partnering with AFT International Affairs, AFT Asian American and Pacific Islander Task Force, and APALA, the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance, to present this democracy webinar. Defending democracy and defeating authoritarianism requires all of us, and the AFT is engaged in all fronts, in the courts, the court of public opinion, in the Congress, the ballot box, in commerce, on the streets, and in communities, because our future is on the line. I was really proud to see so many Americans in protest from March 4th to the amazing peaceful gatherings for No Kings in June and in October. And I was inspired last year when after the president of South Korea called martial law, thousands of people took the streets to protest. It was a massive people-powered movement to the point that the government had to rescind martial law, hold their president accountable, push through democratic reforms. And in this webinar, we get to hear firsthand on-the-ground observations from leaders of the teacher unions, the metal worker unions, the transport unions, the South Korean Labor Federation, who are on the street mobilizing their union members and the public. I hope tonight inspires and motivates you, because it's important to listen to these panelists about what they did in December and what they are doing now, what the South Korean labor movement and civil society partners did to get ready and now to hold their government accountable for restoring the rule of law and democratic governance. The South Korean unions are engaging with government to ensure that people's needs are met. They are trying to create the vigilance needed to make sure that democracy stays the course. So again, thank you for joining us. I hope you join us in the future for this series. We are really doing a deep dive into Hungary, South Africa, and Chile in the coming months. So thank you, and let's begin.
Thank you so much, Randi. And I want to thank everyone who has joined us tonight. Thank you to our audience members who are here. Thank you to our panelists and our moderator, who I will introduce in a moment. And thank you so much to our partners in putting together this webinar for you, Defending Democracy, the Role of South Korean Labor Unions. The Albert Shanker Institute is so grateful to be joined by AFT in a partnership, along specifically with AFT's AAPI Task Force and APALA, the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance. This partnership is so important to us. And equally important is dedicating tonight's webinar to Kent Wong and his solidarity and his memory. We are dedicating this webinar to Kent Wong tonight because he was an internationally known labor leader and educator who led the UCLA Labor Center, and because Kent was a longtime friend to so many of us in this space. Kent was close to Randi Weingarten of the AFT. He was close to me. He was close to the Albert Shanker Institute. He was the founding president of APALA. He was a dear colleague to Jessica Tang. And we would like to make sure that Kent's friends, his comrades, his family know that tonight's webinar is sincerely dedicated to him, to his memory, and to the solidarity we all felt from Kent Wong. In tonight's webinar, we are going to have the opportunity to hear from our panelists, and you as the audience are going to have the opportunity to ask questions. If you are familiar with Zoom webinars format, you'll know that there is a Q&A link at the bottom of your screen. If you have not found it yet, go to the bottom of your screen. You'll find a link that says Q&A, and where you will be able to type in your question. We will get to as many questions as we can at the end of this webinar. It is now my absolute pleasure to introduce our panelists. We are privileged tonight to be able to be joined by incredible labor leaders from South Korea. So good morning to our South Korean colleagues, and good afternoon and good evening to our American audience. We are joined by Wolsan Liam of the ITF, Hyun-Soo Hwang from KTU, Haewon Chong from KMWU, KCTU, and Mikyung Ryu from KCTU. And tonight's webinar will be moderated by Jessica Tang. Jessica is president of AFT Massachusetts, and Jessica is a member of the Albert Shanker Institute Board of Directors. With that, Jessica, why don't I hand it to you to begin tonight's webinar? Thank you all for joining us.
Thanks so much, Mary Catherine. And we are so glad to see you here this evening and to dedicate this webinar to Kent Wong, who would have been thrilled to know that this was happening because he believes so much in connections between the U.S. labor movement and labor unions in Asia and throughout the world, really, as an internationalist, and actually had visited South Korea, had attended labor conferences actually in South Korea, and even joined workers when they were on strike in South Korea as well. I learned that actually from his son this weekend when we were at a memorial service for him. And so the truth is, though, we do have a lot to learn from each other, and particularly in this moment from South Korea. Just quick context and background, we know, for example, from a lot of research on authoritarianism, which is what we're facing here in the United States right now, that when there's a civil resistance movement, there's maybe, about 50-50 chance, a little bit better than 50% chance that the country can actually U-turn and reclaim our democracy. Without a civil resistance movement, it's even worse. It's like 17%. But when trade unions are involved in the civil resistance movement, that percentage goes all the way up to 83%. And so we have so much to learn from our comrades in South Korea, and are so thrilled that you are here this evening and that we have this opportunity to learn from you all. So we're going to just dive right in because we don't have a lot of time tonight. And the first question goes to Wolsan. So to start us off, can you give us a brief overview of the events that led to the declaration of martial law on December 3rd, 2024, and the protest movement that followed, and an eventual change in government to a democratic president? Also, what do you think American workers need to know for context to understand the role of Korean trade unions in the defense of democracy in South Korea? And thank you again so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. And it's wonderful to be able to share with colleagues, comrades, brothers and sisters in the United States, even though we can't see your faces. I will try to answer that question briefly. It's a lot to do in a short amount of time, and I've got some pictures behind me just to give you a sense of what it felt like during this period in Korea. So obviously, I think many people will have seen the news about the declaration of martial law and the protests and movement that followed. On December 3, you would have seen images like this, maybe even on the front of the New York Times or other US papers, as citizens and workers rushed to the National Assembly, which is like our Congress, after President Yoon Suk-yeol declared martial law to make it possible for legislators to enter the building to vote down that martial law. Then you would have seen images of colorful mass protests, which brought together workers, women, young people, LGBTQ people, migrant workers, other Koreans, all calling for Yoon's impeachment and also defending democracy and calling for the restoration, as Randy said, of law, of the rule of law. You may also or may not have noticed this, but if you had looked closely, you would have also seen that there were growing protests of right-wing forces that were in support of martial law and against impeachment, and in a very kind of scary way, Many of the imagery that you might have seen will look very similar to MAGA-like symbolism. So through this protest, this mass protest movement, which you will hear more about from as the panel goes on, President Yoon was formally stripped of his post on April 4th. And then on June 3rd, an early presidential election was held, and a Democratic president, Lee Jae-myung, was elected. So this process looks probably like what you would really like to see happen in the United States. But in order to be able to draw lessons from this experience, it's important to understand the context and some key similarities and differences between the two countries. So like the United States, as a similarity, Korea has a two-party system with power concentrated in the hands of the executive, more and more so. So much so that both systems are called imperial presidencies often, and that creates the background for this grab of power. Politics in both countries have become increasingly polarized. So conservative forces in both countries use a sort of us versus them mentality. On the night when martial law was declared, Yoon used the specter of the enemies of the state, pro-North Korea, enemies of this state, which really kind of was a broad net to encompass democratic politicians, unions, civil society actors, in order to justify martial law. So these things may feel very similar, but what are some of the differences? So while the United States is really, really big, Korea is a tiny country, about the size of Indiana, with a population of 51 million in that small space, which makes mass mobilization easier. Also, the standoff between unions and the government of Korea is much more overt and has a long history. And in fact, Korean unions, it's very much in the DNA of Korean unions to fight against conservative governments. And I want to just talk a little bit about that history. So the democratic labor movement grew out of struggles against military dictatorship over the last 40 decades, and you can see some images of this. In 1980 and 1987, workers were at the forefront of people's uprisings for democratization. And through that process, workers gained a sense of themselves as agents of history. In 1987, we have what was called the Spring Uprising, or the democratization movement, which eventually led to the introduction of democratic elections. And that really sparked what we call the democratic trade union movement, which leads eventually to the founding of our AFL-CIO, the KCTU, workers starting to strike in their workplaces and form trade unions that were independent outside of the government-controlled national center. So when KCTU, and I think probably Megan will get into this more, was when our national center was founded, and it marks its 30th year anniversary this year. It took on the principles of building a workers' party, building industrial unions, and achieving social transformation for equality, freedom, and workers' liberation. And so, as I said, you can say this fight for democracy and a new society is embedded in the DNA of trade unions, of Korean trade unions. They have both mentality and also a structure that was built over several decades as a conscious choice, which enables, it's more centralized than US unions, and it enables quick reaction and quick mobilization. And members and leaders are very practiced in being at the front lines of struggles with conservative governments and for democracy. And so during these protests, and I'll let the other speakers talk, unions played the role of holding space in the streets with our own rallies. This is from the rail strike that was going on at the time, so that citizens could then come in and fill out this space and be part of a broader protest movement. And also, Korean unions draw on a history of using culture, song, dance, drumming, as both a way to create an alternative culture to capitalist society, but also as an organizing tool. And maybe some of the other panelists will talk about this more, but during this round of anti-martial law and pro-impeachment protests, we saw both the use of traditional union culture, the symbols like headbands and vests, which I wore on purpose, and flags, right? And suddenly those things which are sometimes kind of they feel a little bit alienating for the public in this space became with unions and citizens coming together became like popular symbols. And at the same time, unions made an effort to embrace a little bit more of a open culture, blending with kind of popular culture, K-pop and other symbols of youth called light sticks, other symbols of youth culture. And so that created a new kind of movement space, which I think, you know, one of the tasks is how do we maintain that alliance or alignment with other social forces going forward. So that's kind of my introduction. I mean, and we can come back to it later. I will say that just because we have a new government does not mean that this fight is over. We have that mobilization of the right is not gone. And, you know, so there are many tasks for how do we build on what we were able to achieve during the protests and really grapple with the deeper problems of, you know, the social structures, economic structure that allows the development of a far right or movements towards authoritarianism. And I think those are questions that we have to grapple with together between workers in the US, Korea, and obviously globally. Thanks, Jessica. I'll
Thank
turn
you.
it back to you.
Appreciate that. And so Wolsan is from the International Transport Workers Federation and is the strategy and policy coordinator. But now we're going to go to a leader at the KCTU, which is kind of the equivalent of the AFL-CIO here in the United States. And so the next question is for Mik-Young Roo, and she's the international director of the Korean Confederation of Trade Unions, again, KCTU. And the question is that Wolsan has talked about, you know, national mobilization and how that's actually really a part of the culture of Korean trade unions and the fight to win and defend democracy as being, you know, like in the DNA of Korean unions. And that, you know, something I think we're trying to build here in the United States is how do you create that culture? But can you help us to better understand what this like means in practice and in this moment in time, and tell us what actions KCTU took, beginning with the declaration of martial law through President Yoon's impeachment? So how does that culture actually turn into action?
Thank you. Actually, I like to share my screen like Wilson, but I need some more additional settings. So I just share my screen like this. Oops. I wonder, I'm sorry to.
Perfect. We
Is
can
it
see.
okay? Yeah, okay.
Perfect.
So yeah, let's let's go back to the December 3rd of 2024, the day our 123 day struggle began. I shall now lay out its course, dividing into four crucial phases. The phase one, prepare the fury, we can say. You may wonder, how could the KCTU move so quickly? The answer is very simple. We are already fighting. We are already fully mobilized because President Yoon Suk-yeol identified trade union as enemies from day one. Under the guise of the rules of law in the labor relation, he treated unions as criminal organization, denying any notion of dialogue or cooperation. Interpreting the rule of law solely as criminal retribution, he intimidated on all. He initiated the all-out assault. We saw the routine raids, mass summons, and judicial harassment, tragically closing the life of the union member Yang Hwe-dong. The government issued a first ever back to work order against the cargo truck driver strike and prosecuted it as an illegal cartel. And above all, President Yoon nullified the core of our 20-year struggle, the amendment of the Trade Union Act, granting subcontracted workers bargaining rights by exercising his veto power twice. It is against this sustained backdrop of oppression that we were already demanding his resignation. Then, days before our planned action targeted December 7th, martial law was declared. So the phase 2, the 6 hours miracle, we can say, the night of the December 3rd to December 4th. Shortly after 10 p.m. on December 3rd, the KCTU acted immediately. An emergency text message was disseminated to call our members to the National Assembly. We knew that the only way to nullify martial law was for the National Assembly to pass a lifting resolution. Military and police forces surround the assembly. Our members and citizens rushed there. We blocked soldiers outside while the state members of the MPs prevented the military from entry from within. And lawmakers met the quorum. Finally, the martial law lifting resolution passed and took Yoon Suk-yeol only 6 hours be compelled to revoke the martial law. But we didn't stop. Our Central Executive Committee convened around 5 a.m. and our decision was clear. Yoon must resign immediately. If not, the Assembly must impeach him. We launched a general strike. And at 8 a.m. on December 3rd, we declared our first indefinite general strike in 23 years. Railway workers, metal workers, and school non-regular workers joined the strike. And phase 3, our goal was clear, make the National Assembly pass the impeachment motion. After the first motion failed on December 10th, we protested furiously. On December 12th, we demanded the arrest of the insurrection ringleader of Yoon Suk-yeol at his residence. And then December 14th, we witnessed the monumental turnout. Our general strike mobilized 2 million people who amassed at the National Assembly. Candlelight flowed like rivers, and the National Assembly could no longer ignore us. The impeachment bill was passed. Then that day, we learned something chilling. Yoon had included the KCTU president on his arrest list during the martial law. He wanted a crush under the military boots. The leaders represented 1.0 million workers. Our rage intensified. The phase number 4 until the end completely. The impeachment passed, but it wasn't over. Yoon refused arrest, mobilizing his security services to visit. From January 3rd to 7th, through heavy snow and freezing cold, we held a sit-in strike in Hannam-dong, his residence. On January 15th, he was finally arrested, but the battle continued. Pro-Yoon forces organized, storming the courthouse, echoing attack on the capital in the US. Every week, we gathered Gwanghwamun. The KCTU intensified members' education and workplace mobilization. And then on April 3rd, one day before the Constitutional Court ruling, we held the emergency outdoor delegate meeting in the heart of the Seoul with a firm resolution. If the court rejects the impeachment, a full general strike would begin on April 17th. The end is known to all. On 4th of April, the Constitutional Court upheld the motion for impeachment. In this fighting, KCTU earned a nickname, the KCTU that opened the way for systematically breaking through police lines and later acting as organized forces to create a breakthrough when the struggle reached an impasse.
Thank you so much. So, when the KCTU called for members to go to the National Assembly by text messages, and this was minutes within martial law being declared. So you all were ready for this moment and were prepared for it. And my understanding also is that you were prepared if the court did not uphold actually the decision as well. But a number of unions were very quick to also to respond to that call to action. And so we're going to go next to Haewon Chong, who's the International Director of the Korean Metal Workers Union. The KM UMWU was one of the first actually to respond. How come you all were so prepared and ready to respond to this call to action from the KCTU?
So actually, I think I think there are three reasons. So the three main reasons. The first is that a strong level of nascent struggle to begin with engenders more competency and capacity to respond quickly when something happens. So it's kind of like a muscle. If you are continually exercising your muscle, then you're stronger. Or if you have parts of your brain that you don't use versus parts of your brain that you do use, the parts of the brain that you tend to use will be stronger. So for us, I think Mi-kyung showed in her first slide the shipyard strike. There was a 51-day subcontracted shipbuilding workers strike. And as Mi-kyung said, we weren't necessarily feeling strong. Actually, we were under attack and under heavy pressure from the government. So for the shipbuilding subcontracted workers strike, without any legal review whatsoever, the president of the country was denigrating the strike with broad statements. It's probably illegal. We should have the riot police raid their strike and this kind of thing from the president of the country. And it was a difficult strike because during the pandemic, the principal employer, the shipyard, cut all of the subcontracted workers' wages across the board 30%. So when the market picked up again and the order book was full, the workers asked the economic employer for bargaining. And the economic employer avoided bargaining, and the president of the country was threatening to storm the strike with riot police and suppress the human cage that Mi-kyung showed you in her slide. So actually, the shipyard, the main employer, then turned around and sued the 5 strike leaders for $35 million US. And it's not because they think that they'll get that from the 5 precarious workers. It's just that they want to bust the union. So this sparked a petition to reform the labor law. And as Mi-kyung said, it was passed through Parliament twice and vetoed twice by President Yoon. But so those shipyard precarious workers, the 5 people being sued for $35 million US, were actually sitting in front of Parliament when martial law was declared. They were on the 14th day of a hunger strike calling for labor law reform. It would have been the 3rd time because the previous 2 times it was vetoed by the president. And them, together with the bogus self-employed auto sales workers, were sending us news and video and taking video of the police blocking off the entrances of Parliament and the soldiers coming to Parliament and sending out the news. So they were literally first responders, and they used their bullhorns and speakers in front of Parliament to help people to shine attention on the soldiers who were there. So this is one thing. A nascent level of struggle allows greater preparedness. The second thing I would say is that we're also very well connected through social media. So the night of the 3rd, I was putting my daughter to sleep. She's about 8 years old and she needs, help to relax. And suddenly my phone is just, buzzing and buzzing and buzzing as if it were continually ringing. It's because I was getting so many social media messages. Come to Parliament. This is really going on. The police have blockaded the entrances. The members of the National Assembly can't get inside and are jumping the walls. Basically, so after my daughter fell asleep, I was looking at my phone and they have all these photos of soldiers holding guns and tanks. And talking with one of my women friends in the trade union movement, you can't help but wonder, if I go to the National Assembly tonight, will I be shot? On the other hand, I think the third part is that we have structures. So this whole communication by social media is also underpinned by structures. So because we also had problem with, sort of sketchy information during the democratic backsliding, it's important that there are structures underpinning all of these social networks and that people are discussing things and that decisions are being made so that we have reasonable faith when our union is asking us to go to the National Assembly that, that there will be a fight back, you know. So actually already, so it was 10:30 when the president declared martial law, 10:30 on a Tuesday night. And by 11:18, our president had already given us internal directives. And by, I think, 11:50 or 4 or something, we already had the statement out to all of our solidarity networks: resist. The metal union will be there with you. Come out, we will be there. And I think it's important because there were thousands and thousands of people in front of Parliament videotaping the soldiers and police with their cell phones. You know, if the soldiers were there in the dark of night with no one there, they might have acted more forcefully to repress. They might have been able to use more force and less afraid of being held accountable for their actions. And so I think it was important that thousands of people were there and filming them and shouting slogans with bullhorns and shining the light on what was going on. And I should say it's also, I guess I'll let you go to the next question though, since I'm running out of time.
Well, we appreciate all that. And if you want to work in anything more in the next question, definitely feel free to. But, you know, the second question for you is that the KMW, you also called for strike action as soon after the martial law declaration. So can you tell us what happened and what that was like for your members? You know, there is some talk of a general strike in the United States, but we don't have a lot of recent experience with this. And, you know, for the unions here who have gone on strike, we know that it takes a lot to get organized to be able to go on strike. So how were you able to organize such an action? And a lot of times we hear from members about the fear, you know, the fear also, you know, just showing up sometimes for mass mobilization. So how have you been able to help get your members to overcome those fears and get to the place where you were able to take such an action?
Well, the short answer to that was that we weren't prepared and we weren't ready, actually. But then we asked our members to step up to the call, and they did. And that's probably because we also have structures in all the regions. So the first night, December 3rd, all levels of the union were discussing what we can do. Then December 4th, because most of the metal factories are in the regions, all of the district chairs, so I guess you'll have district chairs, as well as the heads of the big factory, like the Hyundai Motors, the big shipbuilders, they all came to Seoul and we discussed what are you prepared to do and what are your members prepared to do, because there had been discussions going on at all levels of the union since the night before. And everyone said, you know, we can't let this go unchallenged. This, you know, we have to send the government a message that even if they continue along this route, they will not have our cooperation. We are going to withhold our cooperation. They will not have the economy going forward. And so we felt it was really important. So 70,000 workers walked off the line for 4 hours on December 5th and December 6th. And then because the president, so it was directed at the president, resign, or we will take you down, and you will not have our cooperation if you cling to power. And the next week we had to go on strike again because that Saturday the impeachment motion failed. So that next strikes we actually sent the striking workers to all of the districts where the members of parliament voted against impeachment to show them we were angry. But then we knew that broad civil resistance was necessary. And we knew that it's hard for just ordinary individuals to step up if there isn't some infrastructure of trade unions out there holding the space so that individuals would be able to participate fully. So I'll just keep it short there. But then because we didn't have enough time to prepare, we actually went on an illegal strike. So unlike the rail workers who had a legal wage bargaining going on and who actually settled while we were still on strike, you know, we had to just ask our members to step up. And part of this is because the identity of metal unions, of metal workers in Korea, is intrinsically linked to a long history of struggle for democratization. Like, we fought so that police would have ID so that we could later hold them accountable for brutality and this other, you know, all those institutions of democracy that took years and years to build up. We were there at each bulwark building democracy. So we couldn't see it be taken away at the blink of an eye because of our apathy or our being, you know, I guess, unprepared. So we just asked our members to step up, and they did.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And, it was incredible to see all the different unions stepping up in different ways. And that includes the teachers' unions. And teachers' unions have been a part of so many different democracy movements and being an important part of the civil resistance, the nonviolent mass mobilizations, not just in South Korea, but in many other countries that are facing authoritarianism. And so we're going to turn next to Hyun-Soo Hwang, who's the International Secretary of the Korean Teachers and Education Workers Union. KTU. And so we want to, again, get down to the level of individual union members. And it's one thing for KCTU or KTU to call for protests, but why did the teachers join and how did you get your members to come out? And what kept them coming out every weekend during this time?
Okay, hello everybody. So I think so we have to understand the historical background first. For more than 30 years under the military dictatorship, the general labor movement in Korea faced a severe oppression, and for teachers, so we had more severe repression from the military dictatorship at that time. So because the teachers were regarded as the military dictators' pet or puppets at the time, so for teachers, forming a trade union was completely impossible at the time, and being a union member was impossible too. So, but in 1989, the courageous and brave educators created the Korean Teachers and Education Workers Union, KTU, and then they paid a heavy price for that. More than 1,500 teachers were dismissed simply for being a union member. After 10 years of struggle and fight, our KTU union was legalized in 1999, but the struggle never became easy. Teachers continued to be unfairly dismissed because of the several things, including the unification activities or something. And in the meantime, in 2013, our union KTU was even dissolved by the extreme right-wing government. It was not until 2020 that KTU regained its legal status. So we fought 7 years at the time. And despite this long history of repression, the teachers, we never gave up. We kept organizing and mobilizing and kept defending the professional and democratic rights and kept rebuilding our union. I believe that this tradition of resilience and courage is exactly what enabled us to respond effectively after the Yoon administration's martial law declaration. The strengths we built over decades of struggle became the foundation of our actions today. After the declaration of martial law last year by the Yoon administration, so many union members, teachers, public sector workers, young workers felt that this was no longer just a politics. We all thought that his action declaring martial law had crossed the line severely. So because, the South Korean people, we share the historical trauma about the martial law, which meant always the torture, imprisonment, and massacre. So we shared that kind of trauma from our history. So that was the very big motive, crucial motive to be mobilized. And second, mobilization in the union sector. And so we relied on the already organized networks that already exist inside the KTU and the local union chapters. And so the national leadership or local chapter leadership issued the call, and the union members in local chapters, we are mobilized from their call. So what makes people actually show up, the union members actually show up, is the message delivered by someone they know, the school union rep or a colleague or the local head chapter heads or leaderships. So we honestly say that why we are going to the demonstration, the rallies in the public. So because of the at that time, the declaration of martial law is quite serious problem. So many union members and young members, they understood, and we went together to the rally in downtown in Seoul. So the KTU, we had very centralized system, because the Wilson already mentioned, the South Korea is a very small country. So, but incredibly number of things are always happening everywhere in every sectors, especially in the education sector. So to respond quickly and immediately to all these new developments and new malicious policies, we have a certain degree of centralized system. So that is the one characteristic of our union. So we use that kind of centralized system to mobilize and organize our union members. Then finally, sustaining the participation every weekend required a balance between urgency at that time and also practical logistics. We organized the flexible participation options and shorter gatherings, regional rallies, and online coordination, so that members with heavy workloads in school or family responsibilities could still join in some form. So we also provided clear weekly updates about the political situation for our members to understand. So that's what we did in the period of the martial law declaration. Thank you.
Thank you. And I have one more follow-up question for you. And you mentioned this a little bit, but it's not easy to have members keep coming out day after day, weekend after weekend. It can get tiring. And so, we talk a lot about joy and resistance and the role of music and how you sustain the resistance when things may seem, people might be getting tired, et cetera. So what do you think worked to make the protests meaningful for your members and for all the young people who we saw coming out in numbers? Do you have any thoughts on how you sustain that and keep people coming out even when they're tired?
Yes, that is a very good question. So that is the one big difference between the former rallies in the past. The former rallies in the past was very severe, and so the atmosphere is very severe and heavy. But at this time, the situation was very severe. The martial law is we have never experienced that kind of martial law declaration, but the mood is really light and simple. So I think that makes the protest very meaningful and very supportive. That's why the many young teachers and many young people, they try to join the rallies. And so when I was joining the rallies, and so the speech, they usually they more like the song dancing than speech. So they march together, singing together, dancing together. It makes people very fun and exciting. So that's why it mobilized more members, more young people to the street because it looks like a pop concert. So the issue is very severe, but the atmosphere is really festive, and so that is the one thing that makes the protest more meaningful and emotionally supportive from the young people. That's why the young people try to join again and again, and the mass of the size of the peoples are more getting bigger and bigger. So I think that is very important things in the rallies at this time. Yeah.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. So bringing it back to the present in a minute, we want to come back to McYoung. So again, we know that when you're able to stop authoritarianism, you have to, slow it down, U-turn, but doesn't mean the democracy was great before this happened either. And so there's still work to do, right? So we know there's a new democratic government in place as a result of your actions. But what has changed and what hasn't? And how or what are the priorities for the Korean labor movement now? And how will you continue to defend your democracy and actually make it better?
Well, the most significant change is in the government's approach to trade union. Under Yoon Suk-yeol, union busting was a state policy, but now the new government has officially and unofficially acknowledged that the previous administration's attack on union violated the international labor standard and the constitutional right. And dialogue between the government and trade union has resumed. After years of confrontation, we are back at the social dialogue. And concretely, I mentioned about the revision of the Trade Union Act. After the new administration came in, the amendment bill to the Article 2 and 3 of the TRULA passed in the parliament again. And the new president, Lee Jae-myung, didn't veto it. And it was promulgated, and it will take effect in March of 2026. This amendment will allow workers employed by subcontractors to negotiate directly with the principal employers, addressing one of the most critical issues in Korea's fragmented labor market. And there's also increased attention from the president and the ministers on labor issues that were ignored before, particularly industrial accidents and Korea's shameful industrial fatality rate, employers' failure to fulfill prevention obligations, and the concentration of these dangers among migrant workers. However, there are many things yet to change it. First, the political democracy has been different. The political democracy has not different. In some ways, it's regressed because like in the US, the two-party system has become more entrenched. Minor parties face even greater difficulties as survivors. The two major parties are locked in mutual hostility. The Democratic Party frame the right-wing parties, the conservative opposition parties as insurrection forces that must be eliminated, while the People's Power Party, the opposition party, has moved far right, and calling the ruling party as a criminal gang, and appealing to Yoon's street supporters with increasingly extreme rhetoric. And the polarization has intensified, and parliamentary minor parties align with the ruling party to survive, while truly independent left parties remain marginalized. KCTU's effort to build independent workers' political power has not succeeded. We still lack strong political voices separate from or independent from the major parties. And workplace democracy remains weak. Industrial level bargaining is still extremely difficult. And to strengthen working class solidarity, to narrow the gap based on the company size, employment type, gender, and migration background, to make large corporations responsible for labor conditions throughout their supply chain, we need active sectoral and industry level bargaining, but legal and institutional barriers remain formidable. So the KCTU's priority is we are campaigning for achieving labor rights for all workers, especially the full application of the Labor Standard Act to every workers, regardless of employment type and workplace sizes. And the second one is after the TRULA was revised, we are trying to activate this law to make it real in the workplace level. So we are prepared to bargain with the real employer. And thirdly, we are rebuilding the foundation for the workers' political power. Our previous attempt to political organization has yet succeeded, so we need a new approach. This means massively strengthening political education and training for workers, not just teaching workers to vote a certain way, but building their capacity to analyze, organize, and act politically to create a genuine workers' political culture from the ground.
Thank you so much. And if you didn't see, there is a Q&A, and some of the presenters are actually answering the questions in the Q&A, and I know that we have some open questions. We did want to get into some of those questions, and so with your permission, we're going to, if it's okay with y'all, we might go over a few minutes past the hour. But I'm going to throw out some of the questions from the Q&A. So one I think is maybe specific to Haewon maybe, but does the KMWU have any meaningful relationship with its equivalent U.S. unions in auto, steel, or shipbuilding? And they said, I think I've seen some joint statements before, a signed agreement with UAW of some kind this summer, but I'm curious, given the way that Trump tries to pit industrial workers in the two countries against each other. And
Thanks for the question. Yeah, so the answer is yes. And we formed a formal memorandum of understanding, a solidarity pact with the UAW. And just a couple weeks ago, I think actually just on November 5th, we had a meeting with the machinists together with the steel workers, together with the UAW regarding the shipbuilding investments from Korea into the United States. But I'd like to just say, add though that I know Wol-san in the beginning, she said there are similarities and there are differences, but I feel like our situations are actually very linked. Like the sort of the far right reactions in not only Korea and the United States, but also in other countries involve like a regurgitation or reworking of like enduring Cold War politics across like global and then national and then even like everyday life levels. To amplify resentments and antagonisms that partly came up because of structural changes associated with neoliberalism. So I think that when we went on strike in Korea, our members had the slogan, we're going to rebuild worker-centered democracy. And I think that's not going to just happen in Korea. We'll need further influence and reach because the essential economic structures that are underpinning the rise of the right throughout the world really rely on workers to step up. So I think, even though there are minor differences, that, we are trying to build those solidarity relationships.
And well, similar to that, in terms of also solidarity, are there specific ways in which American unions can support the KCTU and other unions in South Korea? For example, solidarity messages, boycotts, etc. That was another question, and anyone can answer that.
Actually, I should say, even our General Motors Korea workers went out on strike. They're among the 70,000 workers. And General Motors has been telling us, you guys go on strike more than any other plant in the world, and you're never going to get product. You're not going to get any product, and threatening us like this. And then actually, just last week on the 7th, General Motors, even though they had signed a labor agreement that they were going to be discussing how to strengthen their direct sales without any predetermined outcome, they suddenly unilaterally announced closure of 9 direct service centers. And so I think it's not just on the political front, but also the employers are going to be constantly trying to drive wedges between us and keep us apart. So I hope that we all manage to keep a common front.
So there's another question about what about non-union workers and students and other people who came out? They may not have the same lines of communication that you all had. Although I'm going to combine this with another question I saw about social media and if there was a specific channel that was most effective for you all to mobilize, whether it was text, Facebook, social media, email, etc. TikTok, actually, they mentioned as well. So kind of combining those two questions, how did other people who are not unionized know to come out and join you all, and were there particular methods of communication that were particularly effective?
I think I can answer this question. Actually, during the 123 days struggle we don't use TikTok, but our major channel is Facebook and X. But during this period, the how do you call it? They retweet after their name changed. So any posting on our X account was quickly disseminated by the followers. And there is another way to mobilize non-union members, especially young women, the K-pop fans, be mobilized and organized. They use a kind of online community, the various community membership based. And when the KCTU announced our plan or the D-Day of the action, they posted it and they organized not only through the simple participation, but they discussed how they can contribute in the actions, how they can support the overnight camp sit-in struggle in various ways, and they organize their actions through their own channel, but based on the information provided by the KCTU.
There are so many good questions in the Q&A, and I really wish we had time to answer all of them. But we are unfortunately coming to the end of the hour, and I think that we're already going to be going over a little bit because we do have one final question for each of you all, which is just to share, what is your advice to us in the United States right now? You all have been so inspiring, and as much as you all felt like you may not have been prepared at moments, to see what you've been able to do, it has really, truly, I think, given a lot of us hope, and we hope to learn from you all. And so we'd love to hear, maybe we can go in kind of reverse order here of, what is your advice to us? Mick Young, do you want to start first, and then we'll kind of go backwards.
Okay. So, well, to sum up, I don't have any concrete advice, but I want to say that actually we didn't expect the martial law, but we were already mobilized, I mentioned. So the chance or opportunity will come without expectation. So keep mobilized and continue to be ready to act when the chance is come is very important.
Thank you. Hyung-soo, what's your advice for us?
Yes, at first glance, labor union activities can sometimes look like a narrow or the self-interested efforts focused only on the wages or benefits or the workers' well-being, but that is absolutely not the case. This moment has shown clearly that the union activities, union activism, union movement play a crucial role in advancing society as a whole. I believe one of the most important achievements of this period is that many citizens and people in South Korea became to recognize this reality. So union matters, the union is important. So every union action, no matter how small, is meaningful and worthwhile. Thank you.
Thank you. Haewon, what are your words of advice for us?
Well, I think the big takeaway from what we went through is that democracy is incredibly fragile, actually. It takes years and years and years to build up, and it's just in an instant. So even that night on December 3rd, the parliament had voted to withdraw martial law at 1:01 a.m. But then actually soldiers who arrived later and they were in the basement at 1:06, they cut off all the electricity to the first floor of Parliament because they didn't know that they had already voted. But then after they told, it's already been rescinded, this is unlawful, then after 5 minutes of, they turn it on again. But then, if the helicopters were not delayed by bad weather, they were delayed 15 minutes and the soldiers were already inside the National Assembly before the parliamentarians came in. There are so many things that could have gone wrong. So what I want to say is democracy is really fragile. It requires your engagement. It requires your interest and participation. And the more that you stand up, it opens the path for other people to stand up. So your first King's protest, it'll be hard for the first group, but every action that you take will make it easier for the next group of people to also step up and be together. So I forgot to mention that, after our strikes in the beginning, by the 11th of December, we built a coalition of over 1,700 organizations. So you'll probably also need coalition building, but then if each person just remembers democracy is incredibly fragile, it needs your engagement. I hope that'll take you a long way.
Thank you. And Wilson, thank you for all of your help and helping to get this organized as well. You have the last word. What else do we need to know about what happened in South Korea, and what advice do you have for all of us?
Yeah, I'm and I just as for the audience, and I was very honored to be able to be with Jessica Tang in the US until yesterday. At a meeting of local unions and community groups who are having this same conversation. And so I think I want to kind of reflect from, hearing everything that they had said as well, and the questions in the chat, and say, I imagine for people in the US, workers and other people listening to this webinar, that you might be saying, oh, okay, so but you have this history of fighting martial law and fighting military dictatorship in recent history, in recent memory, and you also have you've been mobilizing, and we don't have that history, and we aren't really mobilizing on an everyday in a continuous way in the way that you are. So what do we do now, right? And I think what I would want to say is two things. One is that actually you really do have that history in the United States. I mean, the United States gave us the fight of workers in the US, 1886, gave us the 8-hour workday, gave us after Haymarket, you gave us May Day, right? And so there is a history to draw from, and to go back to that real tradition of workers' solidarity and struggle in this moment is important. Of course, you can't do that immediately, but I also heard unions and community groups in the United States talking very much about getting their members ready, strike schools. I learned the word structure test, like let's do a 1-minute strike and see if we're up for it. What do we need to improve on? And so I think that you are unions, your locals, your allies in your own way are talking now about what to do to prepare. And I would just say, keep having that conversation and doing those things. And then the one other thing that I think didn't come through in our conversation today is the role of leaders in unions. And so, Korean unions, on the local level, on the national level, leaders, they take risks, they step up, and they demonstrate, that they're willing to fight for members at the forefront, and that they are creating space for members to come along. And I know that there is a cultural difference between sort of, kind of needing to respect more individual place in the United States. But I also do think that there is a role for leaders to come out and put forward a very firm message about what is needed in this moment. And then the last thing, which is the big question, which Haewon and everybody alluded to, Mi-kyung also said, is that this doesn't end with mass mobilization. There are questions about how do we intervene in the economy to change the structural base, which is allowing the rise of the right, which is happening, authoritarianism, which is happening globally. And I think, as Haewon said, the right movements are very much talking to each other. In the US and Korea. Somebody asked about churches. Right-wing churches are very much talking to each other in this moment, supporting each other. So there is a big conversation that we need to be having with each other, which is not one way, lessons from here for there, but actually how do we mobilize together? How do we build political power together? How do we understand the economy in a new way together so that we can actually get to that deep level of transformation that we need to create a new form of democracy?
Thank you so much. And, while the right might be talking to each other, we are talking to each other too, as fellow unionists and as part of a global labor movement. And so thank you so much for sharing your learnings with us as we continue to build that global solidarity and find inspiration from each other and learn from each other. And at this point, I'd love to pass it back to Mary Catherine Ricker.
Thank you so much, Jessica, to Wilson, to Hyungsoo, to Mi-kyung, to Haewon. 감사합니다. Thank you so very much for joining us tonight, starting your day with us. I'm so grateful to all of you for sharing your on the ground perspective, your perspective from all of the work you have been doing in Korea and the vantage point you have to be in solidarity with workers around the world, including here in the United States. Thank you so very much for everything. I want to thank our audience as well. Jessica is absolutely right. I want to echo that, Jessica. The questions have been magnificent. We are sorry we did not get to them all. I will assure you that the Albert Shanker Institute has collected those questions, and where it is possible, we will use our commentary, our blog page, the Shanker blog, to answer some of those questions and to continue this conversation, to continue the opportunity for all of us to be able to learn from each other and talk with each other. We would like to end tonight with something that Hyun-Soo taught us from the Korean Teachers Union, and that is that rallies end with the KTU song. So tonight we are ending our program with thanks to Hyun-Soo and the KTU for sharing their ending song with us. So with that, thank you, everybody. We hope to see you again soon. And here is the KTU song.
속의 삶을